everyone, welcome to Java Expert. In today's video, we will discuss about Spring Cloud Config Server. Okay, why we need Spring Cloud Config Server? In the microservice architecture, we will be running our application with more number of services. So there are cases where we may have some common configuration across all the services. For example, we may use some common databases for most of the services. We may use some messaging services, which it can be common for most of the services, and we may use some SSL certificates. It will be common for most of the services. But when we are building the application in a jar format, this property file is which is inside the package of the microservice, right? Normally, so when you're going to upgrade these common properties, like we are going to upgrade in database, or we are migrating MQ to one version to another version, are we going to upgrade, or we are going to renew the SSL certificate. So we have to update this property file in the every service, and we have to redeploy all the services. So which will lead to more development effort and testing effort, as well as which will impact the productivity, right? So that's where the place where the Spring Cloud Config Server coming into the picture, which will remove this unwanted effort of redeploying it and retest and redevelopment. Those things will be avoided using this Spring Cloud Config Server. So what is Spring Cloud Config Server? Spring Cloud Config provides server and client side support for externalize the configuration in a distributed system, right? So externalize the configuration, so which means we are going to detach these properties from our jar, our microservices package, into the in a GitHub repository. So not necessarily that it should be in a GitHub repository, it can be in any other file system also. But in our practical session, we are going to use GitHub for this Spring Cloud Config Server. Okay. With the config server, you have a central place to manage external properties for application across all the environments. So for this, all the application, whatever the common properties we are going to have, which going to be managed in the external properties, going to be GitHub for application across all the environments, right? We may have SIT, UAT in production, right? So when you are running the service, if you are running the service with the SIT profile, which may need some different properties. If you are starting the service with the UAT profile, which may need some different properties, right? Production, ultimately going to be the different properties. So that is also can be managed through Spring Cloud config servers. Okay. So this is a very simple diagram. If you are running the services without a config server, how it is going to be. So we have an employee service which is running with localhost 678 port, and we have a endpoint get employee list, and we have a 3 employee client 1, client 2, client 3, and each client have its own property which is packaged inside the jar file. So what will happen is, when I'm going to migrate this employee service to new server or new port, right? So what will happen, all these clients, employee client 1, employee client 2, employee client 3, all these 3 clients needs to update the endpoint of employee service in their properties, and you have to redeploy it, right? So that is the challenge we have here, right? So how are you going to mitigate using the config server, Spring Cloud config server? So employee service is going to be remain same. So there is no change in the employee service, but in the client end, these property files are going to be stored in the Git repository. We are going to bring the common property, and we are going to store it in the Git repository, and we are going to place the config server between Git repository and the employee client, right? So what will happen is, config server will load the property from the Git repository, and all these employee clients, it will get the property from the config server, and whatever we are updating in the Git repository, that that will be reflected in the config server, and that will be reflected in the client also. So when you are migrating employee service from 678 port to some different port or some different IPs for testing purpose, now we can't change the IP, so we will change the port and we will write out. Okay. So when you're changing the port, so we are going to restart the employee service. We are going to update the port in the Git repository. So we are no need to do anything with the employee clients. It will automatically reflect it, and it will invoke the latest URL of employee service. So this is what we're going to demonstrate in our practical session. So I hope you get some basic idea about what is Spring Cloud Config Server and how it works. So we're going to demonstrate these things in the practical. So let's get into the practical session. So first, we'll create employee service, create new Spring Starter project. So emp service, the project name we will keep it. Emp service. And these details as no. Here we need Spring Web dependency. Next, and finish. So our M service is ready. So I'll create one small test endpoint, that's controller. Click substring. Nothing fancy here. Just to demonstrate the config server. Doing this. Substring. So Java Java right. So I'll do name C. Okay. I'll give these three things. Then wanted to get mapping, get temp list. Okay. So that's it. So our M service is ready. We'll do configuration here, like what we'll run with the we are running 678, 678. So that's it. Just no, we'll do few tests here just to confirm whether this is running properly. Service is started. Go to Postman. Okay. We'll just localhost 678 get employee list. What's the endpoint we have provided? Emp list, right? Yes, it is working. So our M service is ready. Let's create one employee and client. One go project. Here. So we need emp client, we need a Spring Web, and we need a config client, right? So config client we need, next, and finish. That's it. So the emp client project is created. Let's go and we'll create one small press control here also. Same thing. Click Spring test. So here we will call the emp service and we'll get it. For that we need this template. And next we'll create REST template bean. Right. Okay. So annotate with bean. Right. So here and template dot of so here URL and class you want to provide. So you know the class here dot class. Now we need a URL. Okay. So as of now we will hardcode that, and then we will implement the config line details. TT not so it's running 7 8 and get him right. Okay, it's not exchange, it is object. So here start right. So mapping employee list. So our client also ready. Let's test this one. Okay, so we have added Spring Clouds client, right? So it is we have to do this configuration now. So what we can do is we will remove the dependency. We'll add it later. We'll remove comment this one. Comment this. Now start. So it is started. So by default, no, we are not set any port. So by default, it started with 8080. Now we'll test this one. thing 8080. Let's try. Error. One uh dot list, right. That our client. Yeah, let's try now. Okay, so now the both service and client is working. So now the problem is when I'm changing anything on the server endpoint, which will impact the client also. For example, if I'm going to change it here in the server, if I'm going to change it to 6782, we stop both client and server first. I'm changing to 6789. For example, I'm running like this. So which means I have to update this detail in client also. Client we have hard coded here, but here also we have to update. So how we are going to mitigate it now? So for this, what we are going to do is we are going to create the config server now. Go to new Flutter project, config server. You'll see. So here we need two dependencies. One is config server and Spring Boot activator. Let's wait for some time. That's config server project is created. We'll go to main class and we'll enable the config server here with the annotation. So enable config server. So now our config server is ready. So we have to provide some few property, configurations here. I have. So this is the configuration we have to do it for config server. So this application name we provided it, and we are going to maintain these property files in the GitHub. So we have to provide the GitHub URL here. So Spring Cloud config server GitHub URI equal to this is the GitHub URI, which is I have created it. This one, right? And the management endpoint for actuator we are enabling for all, and it is going to be run with 4x8 port. Okay, so let's go to this repository and we'll create the property file over there. Right, so this is a repository, is empty repository. We're going to create property file here. Here application dot properties. So what are we going to configure it here? We are going to configure the employee URL here, right? mp dot service dot URL equal to, so http localhost 6789. So this is the port it's going to be run as get, right. So commit. So the file is getting created now. Now let's go to here. So let's start our config server. Right. So config server is started. So you can check whether it is properly started or not. Go to browser, TP colon 888 actuator. If you're going actuator, so you can see all the properties getting loaded from there. So by default, what is getting loaded because we're not given any profile. So the default profile what you have provided is in the property file m service URL whatever you are given. So that is coming here. So config server is properly started. That we have confirmed now. Right now, config server is ready. Now we'll now configure the config client. Okay, let's go to config client now. Basically, m client, go to m client and we'll configure the config client here. Okay, we have commented that one, right? We'll enable it now. Okay, enable it. So in the config client property files, we have to do few configuration here. So that's it. So one thing is running 8080 port. So Spring config import. So this is a property. So what are you providing here is where the config server is running. So that is the details we are providing here. So config server is running in localhost with 4x8 port. So this is how we have to configure the config server details in the config client. So Spring config import equal to config server colon and its URL. So now our config client also we have done the configuration. So let's start the config client. Before that, so here we have hard coded the URL, right? So instead of that, what we can do is remove this one. We don't need to hard code it here. Instead of that value, we will take it from the properties, right? What's the property name you are given? em dot service dot URL, right? So it will be loaded from the property now. Now let's start the now what are the things we have already started? Config server is started. So now start the config service. M service, start the employee service. Yes, employee service is started now. And now we'll start employee client. Right. So employee client also started now. Let's go and check it out. Okay. So this is where our employee client is running. Temp details will call. Right. We're getting the response side. So what is happening is I'll show it here. So we have employee service and we have stored the endpoint in the Git repository and config server is getting the details from the repository and our client is getting these property details from the config server and it is invoking the employee service, right? So that's how it is working. So now what we can do is we will run with some different port the employee service and we'll see how it is works. Go to service. I'm going to run with 8082 port. I'm changing it and running the service. So now employee says endpoint is changed. Now we're going to going to repository, going to edit this file. 8082 port, committing the change. Now we're not going to do anything with the client. We're going to just restart the client. So we have restarted the client now, right? Go on, check it out. Yes, it works, right? So I think guys will get some fair idea about how the Spring Cloud Config Server works. So this is a very basic, very simple example we have given it. We can configure this config server for application base. Now we have only one client, so no problem. Automatically the default application property is getting loaded. For example, we have a multiple applications, so we need some different config for each application. So that is also can be configured through the config server. Instead of directly placing the application property in the root folder, we have to create the folder with the application names. Inside that, we have to place the property. So automatically, based on the application name what you are providing in the property file in the service, automatically the corresponding property will be loaded. Same way, profile based properties also we can able to configure it. So that's you can try it with you. You can explore even more details config servers. So that's it about this video, guys. I'll see you in the some another video. Thank you, guys.